ABC General Hospital spoilers for Thursday, June 19 reveal that Michael had always admired Jason, even idolized him once, not just for his stoicism or quiet strength, but for his ability to detach. To protect without flinching, to make the hard choices others could never stomach. Growing up, Michael saw Jason as more than family. He was the model of control, the embodiment of sacrifice. The guardian who would walk into fire if it meant preserving the ones he loved. But admiration had slowly curdled into emulation. And now, in the wake of everything that had happened, the betrayal from Drew, the collapse and uncertain reconciliation with Willow, the court battles that nearly cost him his children, Michael wasn't simply looking up to Jason anymore. He was catching up. And it terrified those who still believed Michael had a line he wouldn't cross. He had begun thinking the way Jason used to, making decisions with precision, not passion. He started to observe more than he spoke, calculate risk before he blinked, remove emotion from the equation when necessary. And nowhere was that transformation more terrifying, more intimate, than when it came to Daisy. Ever since Daisy's birth, something primal had awakened in Michael, not just the instincts of a father, but the instincts of a man who had lost too much and refused to lose again. He watched her sleep at night not with peace, but with a pulse of fear in his chest. A sense of ticking time he couldn't explain. Every future flashed before him like a warning. What if she became a pawn in a corporate war? What if someone used her name to manipulate legacy? What if history repeated itself? What if Daisy's innocence was the price someone else would use to settle a score with the Corinthos name? The obsession crept in slowly, masked as devotion. He began researching security systems, rechecking the hospital's birth records, creating contingency plans for emergencies that didn't exist yet. He didn't tell anyone, not even Sasha. But she felt it. In the way he hovered. In the way his voice sharpened when anyone said Daisy's name outside their home. In the way he held Daisy tighter than necessary. As though he was already preparing to lose her. Sasha had lived through obsession before. She had drowned in grief and clawed her way back. But this was different. This was Michael, the man she once loved, the father of their daughter, turning into someone colder, harder, less reachable. She saw Jason's shadow stretching over him. And she felt herself pulled back into a vortex she thought she'd escaped. Daisy wasn't just a child anymore, she was becoming a symbol, of redemption, of legacy. Of everything Michael thought he had to protect. And for Sasha, it was a terrifying burden to witness. Because she loved her daughter more than her own breath. But she feared that the walls Michael was building around Daisy were becoming a prison. For him. For her. For all of them. Their dynamic began to shift. Conversations turned into interrogations. A casual discussion about Daisy's preschool escalated into a 20-minute debate about background checks on teachers. A question about playdates became a standoff over loyalty. Sasha didn't understand how Michael could move so quickly from warmth to ice. And Michael didn't understand how Sasha could still believe and trust. They were fighting the same battle from different trenches, both wanting to protect Daisy, but using weapons that wounded one another. There were moments of softness, when Daisy reached for them both in the middle of the night, when she said "Mama" and "Dada" with equal joy. When her laughter briefly cut through the tension, but those moments were brief. Fleeting. And they made the silence afterward feel colder. The deeper truth was this. Michael wasn't just becoming like Jason, he was haunted by him. By the image of the man who had once protected him, but who had also lived a life of emotional isolation and sacrifice. Michael was afraid that the only way to keep Daisy safe was to become untouchable. And in doing so, he began to shut Sasha out. He didn't mean to. But the obsession with controlling Daisy's future consumed him. He started reading books about child psychology late into the night. Monitoring news about other children with prominent family names. Watching court precedents for custody battles involving powerful families. His mind raced constantly with possibilities, dangers, and traps. And as he chased every shadow, he couldn't see the one forming in his own home, the growing distance between him and the only person who had ever truly understood his grief. Sasha began to break in small ways. She smiled less. She slept in the guest room more often. She avoided family dinners because the silence at the table screamed louder than words. She started journaling again, not for healing, but for survival. She needed somewhere to put her fear, her frustration, her ache. She didn't want to leave Michael. But she didn't recognize him anymore. Not fully. And yet, part of her still hoped. Because every once in a while, when Daisy fell asleep in Michael's arms, she saw a flicker of the man she once loved, gentle, broken, beautiful. The man who had once knelt beside her in a nursery and promised to try again. That man was still inside him, buried under the weight of Jason's shadow, the Corinthos name. And the fear of losing what little joy he had left. And then came the night that changed everything. Daisy had a mild fever. Nothing dangerous. But Michael's reaction was instant and disproportionate. He called 3 doctors. Demanded lab work. Ordered Sasha to cancel her shift. When she pushed back, told him that Daisy was fine and just needed rest, Michael exploded. Not in violence, but in something colder. He said things he couldn't take back. Words that made Sasha freeze, words that echoed the same coldness Drew had once used. Words Jason might have spoken in a moment of pure protection. And Sasha, for the first time in years, took Daisy and walked out. Not forever. But for the night. For space. For breath. Michael didn't sleep. He sat in Daisy's empty nursery, staring at the mobile above her crib, and realized what he had become. Not just a protector. Not just a father. But a man who had let his fear strangle the very thing he loved most. He wasn't Jason. He wasn't Drew. He was himself, and that had to be enough. The next morning, he showed up at Sasha's door. No demands. No plans. Just truth. He told her everything, about the anxiety, the spiraling, the fear that Daisy's future would be ripped away. And Sasha, tears in her eyes, took his hand and said, "The only way she loses is if we lose each other." That night, they didn't fix everything. But they slept in the same room. Daisy nestled between them. And for the first time in months, the air didn't feel like glass. The future of Daisy wasn't just a trigger anymore. It was a path. A shared one. And for Sasha and Michael, it became clear, their daughter didn't need perfect parents. She needed honest ones. And if they could hold on, to each other, to themselves, to the love that had once broken and now trembled back to life, then maybe, just maybe, they could build something stronger than legacy. Something called home. Sonny had weathered countless storms in his life, but nothing compared to the silent, simmering fury that now burned within him. Sidwell, once a trusted ally operating in the margins of Sonny's empire, had become the center of a disturbing new shift, a calculated adjustment reshaping the power dynamic of Port Charles from the shadows. What began as seemingly isolated incidents, delayed shipments, cryptic messages, and evasive glances, had evolved into a pattern too precise to ignore. Surveillance photos of Sasha and Daisy, encrypted communications traced back to forgotten enemies, and the sudden reappearance of dormant threats all pointed to one undeniable conclusion: Sidwell was compromised, and worse, he had opened the door to something far more dangerous. Sonny no longer sought explanations, he wanted the truth. And with each unanswered question, a darker obsession began to rise. This wasn't about territory or pride, it was about family, about blood. About Daisy. The little girl had become the unspoken symbol of legacy, and the idea that she had been watched, tracked, targeted ignited something in Sonny far more volatile than vengeance. Sidwell's silence wasn't just defiance, it was betrayal. Every time he refused to talk, Sonny felt the walls of his control begin to crumble. The new shift wasn't just tactical, it was psychological. Sonny, once guided by discipline and foresight, was now teetering on the edge of raw instinct. His calculated patience gave way to a ruthless determination to extract the truth by any means. Sidwell was no longer the goal, protecting Daisy was. And as Sonny spiraled deeper into this singular obsession, it became clear that something inside him had changed. The man who once balanced power with reason was now fueled by a primal fear of losing the one thing he couldn't replace. This wasn't just a personal war. It was the beginning of a reckoning, and when it came, no traitor would be spared, and no secret would survive. Marco was unraveling from within. Torn between the man he once believed himself to be and the darkness that now clawed at the edges of his sanity. Ever since Natalia had been thrust into danger, everything he thought was certain had begun to crack. The tension within him was no longer just emotional, it was structural, a complete internal shift reshaping the way he saw the world. The people around him, and most terrifying of all, himself. The threat to Natalia wasn't random, it was deliberate, calculated, and far too close for comfort. And it was in that closeness that Marco began to lose control. One of the most jarring adjustments now gripping him was the realization that he wasn't prepared, that all the plans, the instincts, the protective reflexes he had relied on were no longer enough. The illusion of safety had been shattered, and in its place stood a harsh new truth: someone was targeting her to get to him. That threat, subtle, insidious, and deeply personal, awakened something dangerous. The calm exterior Marco had maintained for years was cracking, exposing a storm of panic, rage, and guilt. And as the pressure mounted, so too did his paranoia. He questioned everyone, doubted every conversation, replayed every decision. Convinced that his past had finally caught up and was now using Natalia as leverage. This wasn't just a personal crisis, it was a warning shot in a much larger war. The emotional fallout of seeing Natalia in danger triggered a seismic shift in Marco's psyche, pushing him into uncharted territory where his own judgment could no longer be trusted. And beneath the surface, something else was rising, a growing sense of dread, a realization that this wasn't just a threat. It was a message. One that made it clear, the game had changed. And the next move would be the most explosive yet. Lulu hadn't planned on seeing anyone that evening. In fact, she had almost cancelled her own plans out of sheer exhaustion. But something in her pushed her to show up. Maybe it was the desire for silence that didn't come from being alone. Or maybe it was the quiet intrigue she hadn't admitted to herself since Isaiah first began orbiting her world. When she walked into the bar, low lighting, smooth jazz playing from an old speaker, the smell of whiskey and warm wood filling the air, her eyes found him instantly. Isaiah sat near the end, casually dressed, shoulders broad but relaxed, with an untouched glass of bourbon in front of him as if he were waiting for the right reason to drink it. Lulu was that reason tonight. She moved through the bar with more hesitation than she would have liked to admit, a quiet awareness of herself that she hadn't felt in a long time. Since her return to Port Charles. She had mastered the art of smiling without revealing too much, of laughing when necessary, of being strong in the face of everything she'd lost. But Isaiah wasn't someone she had prepared herself for. He was new, uncharted, both familiar and unknown at once. When he looked up and met her gaze, there was no dramatic reaction. No overt surprise, just a soft acknowledgement that somehow made her feel seen. They greeted one another casually, ordering drinks as if this were just two acquaintances catching up. But within minutes, something began to shift beneath the surface, the way Isaiah leaned in slightly when she spoke, the way Lulu twirled her glass absent-mindedly between her fingers. Eyes flicking toward him more than she intended. Their words were light at first, work, the city, shared acquaintances, but as the drinks flowed and time softened the tension, they began to speak in truths rather than rehearsed exchanges. Lulu told him about the silence in her apartment. About how the sound of Rocco's laughter had once filled every corner. And now she often turned on the TV just to break the stillness. Isaiah listened without interruption. When he spoke, he offered no pity, just presence. He told her about the pressure of constantly being the calm one, the stable one, even when everything inside him felt like it was breaking. And she didn't flinch. She didn't try to fix him. She simply listened. There was a pause then, not an awkward one, but the kind that hovers between two people when something deeper begins to take root. Lulu glanced down at her glass. Then back up at him. "You're not what I expected," she finally said, her voice quiet, almost uncertain. Isaiah smiled gently, but there was weight behind it. "Neither are you," he replied. It wasn't flirtation. It was recognition. As the evening stretched on, so did their ease with each other. Lulu began to laugh more freely, and Isaiah began to smile with his whole face. Not just the polite curve of his lips. They talked about things they didn't often share, moments from childhood, the complexity of being strong for others, the isolation that comes with resilience. The emotional energy between them grew, not through grand gestures, but through the simple act of honesty. For Lulu, it was unexpected. After everything, the coma, the heartache, the slow climb back to herself, she hadn't considered the possibility of connection, not truly. But Isaiah didn't demand anything from her. He didn't ask her to be anything more than what she already was. And that, perhaps, was what made the pull toward him feel so different from anything else she had known. For Isaiah, Lulu was a surprise. He had admired her from a distance, her strength, her grace under pressure, the way she carried pain with dignity. But sitting across from her now, watching her speak with vulnerability and wit, he saw something else, someone who still had walls, but didn't want them anymore. Someone who was trying to rediscover what it meant to feel safe again. And the more they talked, the more he felt the stirrings of something rare, not just interest, but resonance. There was no kiss that night, no promises exchanged, no declarations of affection. Just a moment, as they stood outside under the faint glow of a street lamp, preparing to part ways, when their eyes locked, and neither moved. The silence was full. Not of discomfort, but of possibility. The kind that comes when two people realize that something has begun, even if they can't name it yet. They said goodnight with a soft smile, and when Lulu walked away, she felt the weight of the past loosen its grip on her shoulders just a little. Isaiah watched her go, his mind quieter than it had been in weeks. It was subtle, this beginning, but powerful. And in a town like Port Charles, where chaos is constant and love is often a battlefield, that quiet power, that whisper of a new emotional thread weaving itself between two people, might just be the most dangerous and beautiful force of all. Jordan didn't realize how far things had gone until she heard the words coming out of Anna's mouth. It wasn't just the content, the disturbing level of detail, the strategic clarity, the surgical precision of it all, it was the delivery. Anna didn't flinch. Her voice was steady, her eyes fixed on something beyond the room. Something deeper and more dangerous than anything Jordan had anticipated. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, Jordan felt the walls of law and order cracking under the pressure of something far more primal, survival. The adjustment happening within Anna wasn't temporary. It was transformation. She was no longer trying to contain Sidwell, she was preparing to destroy him. At first, Jordan had thought this was just another high-risk WSB fallout situation. Something that could be managed with clear heads and sharp protocols. But this was something else. Anna wasn't briefing her. She was warning her. She laid out a tactical approach that bypassed every legal channel Jordan had sworn to uphold. It wasn't theoretical. There were names, locations, timelines. Even a fallback plan in case something went sideways. It wasn't just thorough. It was chilling. The adjustment in Anna had moved past moral hesitation, she had reached the point of no return. The former spy, the decorated agent, the principled force of justice was now speaking like someone prepared to operate in absolute darkness. Not for vengeance, but for necessity. Jordan listened. Against every instinct, she listened. Not because she agreed, but because she couldn't ignore what had brought Anna to this point. Sidwell wasn't just a fugitive. He wasn't just a criminal. He was a ghost wrapped in bureaucracy, a man whose fingerprints never stayed long enough to leave evidence, whose money moved faster than any jurisdiction could trace. Every attempt to bring him in had failed. Witnesses had disappeared. Evidence had been tampered with. Informants had turned up dead. And now, with the latest leak confirming that Sidwell had infiltrated several classified systems, including one that tracked the Corinthos family, the stakes were no longer abstract. They were personal. Anna had changed. But maybe they all had. What disturbed Jordan wasn't just Anna's certainty, it was how familiar it felt. How easily the idea of eliminating Sidwell fit into the emotional framework they now existed within. The law had failed. The system had bent too far. And in its collapse, something else had grown, something harder, sharper, more dangerous. The adjustment wasn't just happening in Anna. It was happening in all of them. And the more Jordan replayed everything in her mind, the near miss on Sasha and Daisy, the encrypted messages linking Sidwell to high-level operatives overseas, the trail of erased data connected to the deaths of 2 junior agents, the more she realized that this wasn't just one rogue operative. This was a network. A hydra. And Sidwell was its face. Jordan had spent her career believing in structure. In arrest warrants, and Miranda rights, and legal chains of custody. But as Anna laid out the plan, as she detailed how to draw Sidwell out, how to isolate him, how to neutralize him before he could vanish again, Jordan felt that structure dissolving into irrelevance. What good were rules in a war where the enemy didn't recognize any? How could justice be served by a system Sidwell had already corrupted from the inside? The room felt colder. Or maybe that was just her body responding to the weight of what she now understood. Anna wasn't asking for permission. She was offering a choice, join her, or stay behind. But either way, Sidwell would fall. The adjustment had reached a fever pitch. What started as controlled containment was now full psychological warfare. Anna was assembling the pieces of something unrecognizable, a mission stripped of oversight. Forged in the crucible of betrayal and consequence. And Jordan, once the voice of restraint, found herself unable to walk away. Not because she believed this was right, but because she believed this was the only way left. The fallout had already begun. Michael had noticed the surveillance. Sonny had gone dark and was now circling Sidwell with his own brand of justice. Jason had pulled back into the shadows, silent but alert. And now Anna, the last thread holding the institutional response together, had made her move. This wasn't just about Sidwell anymore. It was about what they were becoming in pursuit of stopping him. And as Anna concluded her plan with the same calm expression she wore when walking through fire, Jordan knew that this wasn't a proposal. It was a declaration. The adjustment was permanent. The mission was clear. And the descent into moral ambiguity was complete. In that moment, Jordan didn't speak. She didn't object. She didn't agree. She simply nodded once, small. Barely perceptible, but it was enough. Because deep down, she knew the truth. When justice fails, judgment rises. And in the chaos Sidwell had unleashed, there was no room left for hesitation. Only action. And so, the plan to eliminate Sidwell began not with gunfire or alarms, but with silence. The silence between 2 women who had once believed in rules, and now only believed in results.